Okay, everybody, good morning. Hope you guys are doing well on this Thursday. We're just 2 days away from some Seahawks football. We got a playoff game coming up. Very exciting. Going to be a fun weekend of football. And obviously, we're waiting on that final injury report that should be coming out in about 4 hours. That's going to be the last significant bit of information we get about these two teams. And then we're basically just waiting to see what happens on Saturday. So, not going to be a lot of more information coming out beyond that. And we're just chilling and waiting to see what happens. I am going to be streaming with the Hawks Nest in about 3 hours. So, noon, me and him are going to go live. We're going to talk about this game, talk about what might have changed over the last 2 weeks since the last time we played them, talk about the matchup. You guys know the drill, so definitely tune in for that. If you can't tune in for it live, check out the VOD, and we will discuss what there is to discuss about this Niners matchup. All right, so more Pro Football Focus stuff. All right, everybody, before we go any further into the video, I want to take a minute to tell you guys about a wonderful app called Sleeper, a one-stop shop for all your sports needs. You can celebrate and chat about sports in real time with other users. You can get all kinds of scores, sports news, and sports alerts with blazing fast speed. And of course, you can play in fantasy leagues and win real money on picks contests. So enjoy sports with other people in a community. Download the Sleeper app today and remember to use the promo code SBN, that is SBN, for up to a $100 match on your first deposit. And they also have a free $20 entry right now, no deposit required. So pair those two up. Terms and conditions do apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Currently operational in over 25 states and growing. Check out the Sleeper app and have fun with sports this year. All right, so hope to see you guys there in that stream. But this video, we're going to be doing some more Pro Football Focus deep dives, and this video is going to be all about the offensive line. And we're going to do the offensive line as a whole, like collectively. And we're going to do it individually as well, but we're going to do it all in this one video because, to be perfectly honest, Pro Football Focus doesn't have a ton of super granular analytics when it comes to offensive line play. It's not like quarterback or even running back or wide receiver where there's a ton of different things you can look at. The main thing Pro Football Focus has for offensive linemen is just some of the pass protection numbers like pressures allowed and penalties. That's kind of it. Other than that, it's their grading, and their grading might be useful, but it also doesn't really tell you anything other than this is how Pro Football Focus perceives the individual player, but we don't necessarily know why they perceive things that way. So we're going to just mostly take a look at that. Okay, so what we did here, this page that's up on the screen right now, I sorted every tackle in the NFL by number of snaps they took on the left side, so left tackle specifically. And basically what this does is it allows us to view only left tackles for 2025. This is essentially 25 players, basically every player that played most of the 2025 season at left tackle. So it's a way to make kind of an apples to apples comparison. And obviously, when we're talking about left tackle, we're talking about Charles Cross. Now, we're going to be looking at pass protection numbers because the run blocking numbers are not very, they're not going to tell us very much. We're not really going to be looking at that because there's nothing to look at except for just the grade. Now, keep in mind here with Charles Cross, he had 450 pass blocking reps in 2025, right? 450. The only players on this list with fewer are Ronnie Staley and Andrew Thomas. And they had basically the exact same number, if we're being real here. It's 448, 447. Everyone else had more, and quite a few of them had significantly more. So keep that in mind as we look at this. Seattle does not throw the ball as much as these other teams. In most cases, it's not even close. So let's take a look at the numbers and keep that in mind as we try to evaluate how good these players were. So Charles Cross, remember, we already determined when we looked at the Sam Darnold stats 2 days ago, excuse me, that one thing that Sam Darnold is very good at is not getting pressured of his own volition. He is not causing very many pressures or hits or sacks. So the pressures, the hits, the sacks that happen are almost always on the offensive lineman or the running back or the tight end that is responsible. Very rare is Sam Darnold responsible. So with that in mind, let's just take a look at the total pressure count. Charles Cross, 450 pass blocking reps, 24 pressures allowed. How does that stack up with the rest of the league? The answer is fairly well, right? Like the two players that I mentioned a second ago that have a similar number of pass blocking reps, Ronnie Staley had 28. Andrew Thomas had 13, though, so that's actually a good deal better. But you take a look at some of these other guys that have a similar number of pass blocking reps, Will Campbell, Tristan Wirfs, they're basically in the same general territory. So it's actually quite good. And as you start moving up and talking about players that had significantly more reps at left tackle pass protecting, like Taylor Decker, 33 on 551 pass blocking reps. Ike Ekwonu, 40 pressures allowed on 550. Dan Moore Jr. in Tennessee, 620, but 48 pressures allowed. You can keep going up to the top here. Like Garrett Bowles is superhuman with what he's doing. He's got 714 pass blocking reps, only 19 pressures allowed. So that guy is just doing absolutely incredible work protecting Bo Nix, although Bo Nix does a lot to help himself in that regard. But you look at some of these other guys that are getting a lot more reps pass protecting than Cross, like Orlando Brown Jr., over 730 pass blocking reps, but 46 pressures allowed. So that's basically double Cross. Jake Matthews, 609 pass blocking reps, 39 pressures allowed. So you can keep going down the list here. And these guys that have more pass blocking reps than Cross, Kelvin Banks, Alaric Jackson, Fashanu, Ariante Ursary, they're all allowing way more pressure than Cross did. If you want to try to find guys that are actually doing significantly better than Cross, relatively speaking, Patrick Paul in Miami, only 25 pressures allowed on 580 reps. And the thing to keep in mind is that Miami and Tua in particular that's an offense that is predicated on getting the ball out fast, even faster than Seattle does. Jordan Maltaya, Mailata of the Eagles, he did better than Cross this year, only 27 pressures allowed on 563 pass blocking reps, but Mailata is kind of the gold standard, or at least close to the gold standard at the position. You go through this, and one thing that you learn pretty quickly is that in terms of the raw number of pressures allowed, Cross stacks up very well with the better players in the league at his position. The only guys really that Cross doesn't compare overly favorably to here would be Andrew Thomas, Laramie Tunsil, Jordan Mailata, I can never remember how to pronounce the name, and Patrick Paul, I guess. And of course, Garrett Bowles. And other than that, like even Tristan Wirfs, who had only 12 games this year, who actually played a little bit less than Cross, even he was kind of on the same plane in terms of pressures allowed. So what I'm trying to get to here is if you just take a look at the raw pressure numbers, Cross is doing very well. And he only allowed 2 sacks this year. And as you can see, most of these players allowed significantly more than 2 sacks in 2025. So something to keep in mind, because I know I saw a lot of comments a couple weeks ago of people saying that Charles Cross is mediocre or something. He's not the greatest run blocker. I do agree with that. A lot of these guys that we're talking about here are clearly better run blockers, although some of them aren't. But in terms of pass protection, his 2025 was very good. And I know he wasn't graded in a stellar way, so there could be some nuance there that you could get into if you really wanted to. But really, in terms of the actual number of pressures that he allowed, it's very good. Now, if you apply the same study to Gray Zabel, I believe, no, I'm sorry, not Gray Zabel, Abraham Lucas. So let's talk about Abraham Lucas here. Now, he actually was 7th in the league in snaps taken at right tackle, so that's actually quite good. So he was one of the most high volume right tackles, but again, we're only looking at pass protection, 562 pass blocking snaps. And if you take a look at this list, there are only a couple of guys that had fewer pass blocking reps than that. And the guys that had fewer tended to have not that many fewer until you get down to the bottom. And these are guys who missed significant chunks of the season. And we know Abe Lucas didn't miss any games this year. He played all 17. He never really got hurt. So therefore, you're still seeing that effect, but it's a little bit less pronounced with Lucas because he played every snap. So keeping that in mind here, 562 pass blocking reps for Abe Lucas, 32 pressures allowed. So how does that stack up with some of his peers at the right tackle spot? 1 second. Okay, so if you're making the comparison here, you're talking about players like Darnell Wright and Jermaine Elumonor. These are players that had a similar number of reps at right tackle total, but more pass blocking reps. And you can see 19 pressures allowed, 19 pressures allowed. You've got Elijah Wilkinson in Atlanta. Okay, he was worse, but remember, he wasn't supposed to be a starter. He was a backup that Atlanta had to put out there because Caleb McGarry got hurt. You got Colton Kivitz, who had way more snaps and gave up a few fewer pressures. Mike McGlinchey, more pressures, but way more snaps. Terrence Steele, okay, that's a little extreme. 52 pressures allowed, but look at how many more pass blocking reps he had. So honestly, as you look at this, Abe Lucas, little bit more shaky in terms of the pressures that he allowed. 32 on 562 reps is actually not the best. Like, Membo had one more allowed on way more snaps, almost 100 more snaps. So when you drill down into it, Abe Lucas, not so great this year here. I wouldn't say he was bad, and I would also say that it was kind of a 1 or 2 games really put him behind the 8 balls. There were a couple games where he really struggled, but, like, Morgan Moses allowed fewer pressures on more pass blocking snaps, and Morgan Moses, I mean, that guy's been around forever. Troy Fatanu, who I don't even know if he is supposed to be playing tackle, allowed fewer pressures on more pass blocking reps. Um, we got the guys that allowed more pressures per pass blocking rep than Abe Lucas this year are guys like DJ Glaze, right? Look at Penny Sewell, and I know Sewell's kind of the gold standard here, but over 600 pass blocking reps, only 19 pressures allowed. Anton Harrison had better pass blocking efficiency. Taylor Moton had way better pass blocking efficiency. You do find a few guys here and there, like Spencer Brown, who was a little bit worse. JC Latham was probably a little bit worse or about the same. But a lot of these guys, they were a lot more efficient in terms of protecting their quarterback than Lucas. So while Lucas did do a lot of good things this year, mostly staying on the field, and while I wouldn't say he's bad, there is something to work on here. And 4 sacks allowed is fine. Like, I'm not really worried about the 4 sacks, whatever we got. I mean, DJ Glazier allowed 10 sacks this year. But like we just said, we know that Sam Darnold is not holding onto the ball too long on most of these pressures. So this is something that could stand to get a little bit better in 2026. And maybe Abe Lucas is never going to be an elite right tackle, but I do think he can get a little bit better here and clean things up just a little bit. When you compare him to the other guys that played right tackle this year, it doesn't really hold up that well. All right, same practice over at left guard here with Gray Zabel, who was actually 8th in number of snaps played at left guard this year in the NFL. So he did basically make it through the whole season. 24 pressures allowed for him, same number as Charles Cross, by the way. And how does that stack up with his peers? Keeping in mind that, again, Seattle did not throw the ball as much as these other teams by and large. So 553 pass blocking reps, and that's pretty decent. But you can see that most of these guys on this list have more. Like the guys who have fewer would be Andrew Voorhees, Chris Paul, Matthew Bergeron, guys who either missed a little bit of time or are on even more run-heavy offenses. So with that in mind, let's try to make a comparison here of 24 pressures allowed. immediately you kind of see that a lot of these guys near the top have about the same number or fewer on more snaps. Like Kingsley Sumayataya over in Kansas City, yeah, he has significantly more, but he also has significantly more reps. So it's actually pretty close in terms of the honest efficiency. Joe Thuney over in Chicago, way fewer pressures on way more pass blocking snaps. John Runyon in New York, more pressures, but more snaps. Same with Joel Bitonio. Now, unlike with Abe Lucas, who is a veteran, Gray Zabel is a rookie. So the fact that he's stacking up fairly well with a lot of these guys is encouraging. I'm not expecting Zabel to be one of the best left guards in the league already. That's not reasonable. But at the same time, we make comparisons where we can, right? Ezra Cleveland had a much better year in terms of pass blocking efficiency. Peter Skoronsky had a better year in terms of pass blocking efficiency by a pretty good margin. Look at Quentin Nelson, almost 100 more pass blocking reps, only 15 pressures allowed. David Edwards had a similar year. John Simpson had about the same efficiency in terms of just the number of pressures allowed. And Damian Lewis, significantly better. Guys that Zabel was clearly better than would be guys like Savai Naia. So, hey, he's been the better left guard rookie than Jonas Savai Naia. So that's nice. But Andrew Voorhees, kind of similar, a little bit better than Voorhees. Been slightly better than Dylan Fairchild. So there is work to be done here, but there's also some stuff to be really encouraged by because, again, this is the first year of his NFL career. So I'm not saying this to say that I think he's bad or that he had a bad year, but you can see, I mean, like Isaac Suomalo, 15 pressures allowed on 465 pass blocking reps. So there is plenty of room for him to grow, plenty of room for him to get better. Now, the good news is he only allowed 2 sacks all year. That stacks up pretty well with some of the better guys in the league. And even when you account for the fact that he had fewer reps than everybody else, it's still very good. But the pressure count, you can see that if he had played as many pass blocking reps as these other guys, it would have been one of the higher numbers in the league, although not the highest. And there is something to be said for that. Okay, right guard here, and this is, of course, the main issue that most Seahawks fans have with the offensive line right now. Anthony Bradford, who did, I think, miss a tiny bit of time this year, but basically played the whole season. 10th most snaps in the league at right guard, 560 pass blocking reps total, which again is fewer than most of these players, but it's more than a couple of them. Like Daniel Faalele in Baltimore, he had more than that. You have more than Ed Ingram over in Houston, who missed some time, more than Kevin Dotson in LA because he's missed some time, et cetera, et cetera. So trying to make the comparison here. Oh, let me shorten this up a little bit, make it a little cleaner. So we're looking at Anthony Bradford in 10th place here in the total number of snaps. Now, pressure count, 28. 28 pressures allowed by Anthony Bradford this year. And you look at these other numbers, it's a little bit surprising, isn't it? Right? Like 28 pressures allowed. That's basically the same as Joe Tippmann, and Tippmann had a handful more snaps, but it's not that far off. You've got Mason McCormick. He did a little bit better, but it's not some radical big difference. Falele actually allowed more pressure on fewer pass blocking reps. Tyler Steen, 36. So, yeah, he had more pass blocking reps, but not that many more. You got guys like Chris Lindstrom, who has a very strong reputation, allowed 44 pressures this year. That's way more than Bradford. Now, there are definitely some guys here that come out looking a lot better than Bradford. Greg Van Roten in New York had a really good year. Jonah Jackson in Chicago. Osiris Torrance was relatively clean. Remember, these guys are playing a lot more snaps than Bradford, so their numbers are a little bit more impressive, even if they're slightly higher. Dominic Pooney in San Fran, 30 pressures allowed on more snaps. But it's actually really not that radically far off from Bradford. He's not that far off from a lot of these guys. A few of them, sure, like Kevin Zeitler in Tennessee, 16 pressures allowed on almost 600 reps. That's really strong. That's really good. Kevin Dotson in LA was doing really well. 20 pressures allowed in 521 snaps. So there are definitely guys here that Bradford doesn't compare terribly well to. Cesar Ruiz, even Cole Strange actually had a little bit of a better year. Wyatt Teller, Isaiah Adams. So there is some stuff here that tells you that Bradford's having issues, but the initial impression I get looking at this, and by the way, only 4 penalties, only 6 sacks allowed. That to me kind of says, yeah, he's on the lower end in this regard, but he's far from the worst. And he is graded like he's the worst, I will admit, so there's probably a little more nuance there. But this doesn't strike me as somebody that I would call the worst pass blocking right guard in football based purely on the raw numbers. So something to think about here, kind of interesting. Obviously the main issue with Bradford isn't the numbers so much as it is the lack of dependability, but it does kind of, I think it is a little bit surprising that Bradford's pressure numbers allowed are not much higher given his reputation. And the final thing we're going to look at here, well, close to the final thing would be center, where we only had one guy play significant snaps this year, but unfortunately it was well under the expected number because Jalen Sundell did miss about a month with an injury. So we're just going to talk about Jalen Sundell, and this is going to be a little bit complicated because he only had 407 pass blocking reps. Little bit harder to compare him, but if you take a look at 407 pass blocking reps, 11 pressures allowed, yeah, you can see that above my head. It's actually pretty comparable with the really strong pass protectors at the center position. Guys like um the elite guys are obviously doing a little bit better, but not by that much. Like Drew Dahlman is considered by many to be one of the best centers in the league. He had more than double that pressure count on less than 700 pass blocking reps. Froholt in Arizona had 20 pressures allowed on almost double the pass blocking reps, so that's a little bit better. Coleman Shelton, 20 pressures allowed. Ted Karras, 19 pressures allowed. Now, these guys are playing a lot more than Sundell played in 2025, but for the most part, it's a commiserate, it's an expected and commiserate number of um, of increased pressure when you compare it to the number of snaps played. Like Creed Humphrey is an exception. 8 pressures allowed in 742 pass blocking reps. That's insane, right? But then you got guys like Bradley Bozeman who are way worse than Sundell on no matter how many fewer snaps they played. Look at Josh Myers in New York, way worse off. Um, it's actually pretty remarkable because Sundell does not have a super strong reputation. I think Seahawks fans think he's just okay, and I don't think he's anything overly special as well, but when you take a look at just the raw pressure number, and I understand that that's a flawed way to look at things, it actually stacks up very well. Like Cooper Bebe in Dallas, he has a pretty good reputation. More pressures allowed with not that many more snaps played. It's actually pretty commiserate. Same with John Michael Schmitz, who is a guy that a lot of Seahawks fans wishes we drafted, or wished that we drafted a few years ago. Cam Jurgens is a little bit better, of course. You've got Aaron Brewer was better this year on a per snap basis. But other than that, man, we're doing pretty well here. So you look at the big picture and we're doing great here. Like most of these guys, they're chilling. I think that if you were to actually look at it in terms of an efficiency question, with only taking into account the raw pressure numbers, you can make an argument our biggest issue in 2025 was Abraham Lucas. Because with Abe Lucas, you compare him to his peers on the number of pass blocking reps he had, it was a little bit more problematic than I would even say Bradford. Now, there's run blocking to take into consideration here, so I'm not saying that he's our worst offensive lineman, but it's an interesting perspective. Final thing that Pro Football Focus does is just offensive line pass blocking efficiency as a group. And this is obviously an area that Seattle has typically done very poorly in. Let me just shrink it down to the regular season only. But for reference, Seattle in the regular season was 13th in the NFL out of 32 teams in pass blocking efficiency, 85.7. So upper half of the league, that doesn't happen all that often. So really cool stuff there. Does illustrate how much of an improvement has been made with this pass blocking. And look, give it up to Kubiak, give it up to Sam Darnold. Those guys are doing a lot of the heavy lifting here. But even when you take into account just the individual play of the offensive linemen, we're headed in the right direction in a big way here. All right, longer video than I wanted. Hope everybody has a good rest of your day. Check out the stream in a few hours, and we'll get an injury report video shortly after that stream is over. We'll probably have the injury report come out during the stream, which that doesn't happen too often, so that'll be fun. And we can talk about whatever it is that we got on stream. But let me know what you guys think about the offensive line. See you guys soon. Go Hawks. Everybody have a great rest of your day.